it back there, or is it up here? I just overlooked it. I may have overlooked it. We found it. Yeah, that's it. Thank you. It's lesson 9 back there, Landon. If you may already have it pulled up. If you don't, that's where we're at. But this lesson, I guess from 2 weeks ago, we started it. And was looking at how God continued to keep this light through the nation of Israel, even in the midst of some, again, things that were going on in both of these nations that weren't great. But God made a promise to David that he was going to withhold his or hold up his line, his lineage, in which, of course, as we're going to be kind of looking at here during the Christmas season, of course, that's what Christ came from. And there was promises made as well to some of these other kings that their lines were going to be destroyed, that their heirs were going to be destroyed, and that their houses were kind of essentially being wiped away from history because of the sin that they had against God. And as 2 weeks ago, we started by looking at chapter 8 of 2 Kings, and we're in 2 Chronicles as well. We were starting to see God fulfilling some of the promises that the prophet Elijah and Elisha both made to these kings, that their lines, their houses were going to fall. We saw in chapter 8 of 2 Kings Ben-Hadad's house being destroyed. And we saw as well the defense of some of the house of the God had promised would continue to stand. We then saw God preserving the Davidic line throughout some of the things in history in chapter 8 as well. And then what we finished up with was God was starting to destroy King Ahab's line, just like he had been promised that it was going to happen. And that started in 2 Kings. But what we finished up with, though, is in 2 Chronicles, which we're going to start with today, and we're going to look at the death of the heirs of Ahab. Get rid of the houses by getting rid of the sons and daughters and stuff that he had already had. So that's kind of where we're going to start at today. The punishment that kind of came down on Ahab, of course, we know the wicked things that Ahab had done as well. And then we'll finish up today by looking at God protecting David's line as well. We've got quite a bit of stuff to get through. Probably won't get through all of it, but we're going to at least try to get started. So 2 Chronicles chapter 22, the first 5 verses. And this starts with the death of Ahab's heirs. Now, during the 1-year reign here in Judah of Ahaziah, he joins forces with King Joram, who was the king of Israel, and they're going to battle the king of Syria during this time, okay? And this battle is taking place at Ramoth Gilead. So the first 5 verses, and the inhabitants of Jerusalem made Ahaziah, his youngest son, old, was Ahaziah, when he began to reign, and he reigned 1 year in Jerusalem. His the daughter of Omri. He also walked in the ways of the house of Ahab. All right, for his mother was his counselor to do wickedly. Wherefore he did evil in the sight of the Lord, like the house of Ahab, for they were his counselors after the death of the father to his destruction. He walked also after the counsel, and went with Jehoram the son of Ahab, king of Syria, smote Joram. Okay, so there's this battle with Syria at Ramoth Gilead. During the battle here, Joram is injured, and out of sympathy, Ahaziah goes and visits Joram while he is there in Jezreel. Okay, now let's go to 2 Kings chapter 9. We'll kind of pick this story back up, or kind of continue with this story. 2 Kings, in the very first verse here of chapter 9, we kind of continue to see what happens here. And as we read through this, while Ahaziah and Joram are still
to go and to anoint a different king. All right. So then Elisha the prophet called one of the children of Israel, again, 2 Kings, of thy loins, and this a box of oil in thine hand, and go and carry him to anoint the help which had been prophesied by Elijah, and that was way over in 1 Kings chapter 19. Okay, we won't flip over there. Kind of remember that happening. Elijah told him that he was going to lose his house. All right, now, so we see here in verses 4 through 10 that we're going to read through, the young prophet, the young man here does exactly as Elisha tells him to do. Go, anoint Jehu, don't hang around, right? Get out of there, don't tarry, come back, get out of there as quick as you can. But God has anointed him to be king. All right. The young man, prophet, went to Ramoth Gilead. And when he came, behold, the captains of the host were sitting, and he said, I have an errand to thee, O captain. And Jehu said, unto which of all of us? And he said, to thee, O captain. So I got something I need to tell you, Jehu. And he's asking who? And he said, I need to tell you that. So he's verse 6. And he arose and went on his head and said unto him, Thus saith the Lord, of the Lord at the hand of Jezebel. For the whole house of Ahab shall perish. Carrying out here the instructions that Elisha had given him. Okay, let me get to where we're at. Of the heirs of Ahab. All right, so when Jehu then tells the following officers that he had been anointed and that he had been proclaimed as king, the people that he's with kind of keeps this noise, this information to themselves. Right, they don't want it to reach Jezebel. King is verse 11. And then Jehu came forth to the service of the Lord, and one said unto him, Is all and his communication. Thus, under him on top of the stairs and blew trumpets, saying, Jehu is king. So Jehu, the son of Jehoshaphat, the son of Nimshi, conspired against Joram. Now Joram had kept the king of Syria, but was returned to be healed in Jezreel of his wounds, which the Syrians had given him. When he fought with Hazael, Jehu said, If nor escape, the army accept him as being king. They had the little thing, the proclamation, whatever it is that they're doing, but he tells them, let's make sure that the because if it did, obviously that's going to cause some problems, right? There's going to be some dissension and some fighting and all that kind of stuff that's going to go happen because of this noise or this information getting out to Ramoth Gilead. All right. So as we now get to verse 16, we see what Jehu. We see he hops on chariot, verse 16, and he rides to Jezreel, because that's where not king anymore, Joram, Ahaziah, the king of Judah, was come down to see Joram. So we had both of the kings there, and Jehu rides to meet them. 45 miles he's riding from Ramoth Gilead, which I hope I have with his soldiers. And as they get close to Jezreel, of course, as we see in verse and again, tower in Jezreel, and he spied the company of Jehu. Is king is at peace. And Jehu answered, What hast thou to do with peace? Turn thee behind me. And the watchman told, saying, He came even unto them, and cometh not again. Writing is like, and he mentions it that of that Jehu and stuff, and now there is so he's as soon as turns to get out of there, and he tells Ahaziah that this is not a good situation. We need to leave. Then we get to verse 24, and this is another really kind of cool, interesting thing that happened. We've kind of seen this happen one other time. But in Jehu drew a bow with his full strength, and the arrow went out at the heart, and he sunk down in his. Joram turns in his chariot, and of course we've seen pictures and videos of horse-drawn chariots. They move quickly, right? Two horses pull a chariot, and they can move away pretty quickly. And this is probably just like you'd see in a movie. The horses taking off, and Joram trying to get out of there as quick as he can. And we see in verse 24 that Jehu grabs an arrow. As fast as he can, and we got to think about this. The chances here of this arrow. Now, I'm sure Jehu's a good shot, right? He's a soldier. He's probably been well practiced in swords and archery. He knows his way around. Let's think that Jehu let fly at Joram, who's riding away in a chariot down a pretty bumpy road. Right through the heart. So the chances of that kind of happening are very slim, or even as good as dead. This was by arrow just got this. Another arrow here just hit him right through. A lot of things that eliminating King Joram. Jehu could have missed. Joram could have stayed in the city instead of coming out to meet Jehu. Joram could have brought a whole bunch of soldiers and stuff. There's a lot of things here that could have gone on, but they didn't. Because we see one more time God promised Ahab this was going to happen, that his house and his heirs would be eliminated. Several years that promise come into life. Okay, verse. Ahaziah, the king of Judah, saw this. He fled by the way of the garden house. And Jehu followed after him and said, Smite him also in the chariot. And they did so at the going up of Gur, which is Elam, and he fled to Megiddo, and died there. And the servants carried him in the chariot to Jerusalem and buried him in a sepulchre with his fathers in the city of David. So we see King assassination of the king, the other king. It happens right before his eyes, and he sees this kind of going down. He tries to escape and get out of the situation. And died the valley of Megiddo, because his death was in direct correlation because of his relationship or association with King Joram. Right? Now let's jump to verse 30. And now, so Jehu now has shown up to Jezreel, and he's killed 2 kings, and he's done it pretty miraculously. Like, he just loosed a random arrow and killed one, and he ran the other one down and had him killed, and ordered the men to throw his body into the field that they were at. And verse 25, because the throwing of that body was another fulfilling of a prophecy that was said some time ago. Then we get to verse 30, and we see that Jehu is not done yet. Right, his reign of terror is not finished yet. And when Jehu was come to Jezreel, Jezebel heard of it, and she painted a window. All right, so Queen Jezebel now sees Jehu coming into Jezreel, where she is at, and she probably has caught wind now that Joram is dead, and that Ahaziah is dead as well. Elisha then tells Jezebel, King Elijah, tells them essentially what's going to happen to them. Okay, Jezebel, I'm sure at the time, thinks nothing of it. She's in power, they're strong, they're not worried about it, whatever it may be. We see now Jezebel a little later on in life, probably still in a position of power somewhat, and she sees Jehu coming into the city, and we now see her not being as brass and being as confident in her own power. All right? And I think what she does here is kind of interesting, and maybe not to you, but it was to me. She, I'm sure, remembers the conversation that Ahab came and told her. He probably said, this crazy old bat just said that our house and our kids are never going to be anything of any importance. We're all eventually going to die. And at the time, I'm sure she kind of laughs at it and whatever it may be. But now we see her, Jehu showing up, these kings dying, and what's her response? What does she do? She paints her face, covers up her head, she disguises herself. Right? She tries to disguise herself so that they won't know Jezebel. All right? Maybe won't know who she is. Now, everybody in the city probably knows who Jezebel is, right? And that's kind of the type of woman that she was. But she's trying to disguise herself to a point that maybe Jehu will not recognize her. This is how I see this happening. Jezebel fully realizes the power of God. Right? Her response to this in trying to hide from Jehu and hide from God is her understanding that God is more powerful than possibly done. Going back to the conversation that she had with Ahab, when Ahab comes rolling in and says, this crazy old bat just said that me, you, and all of our kids are going to die. Right? I'm sure that comes flying back into her mind. And she has a realization here that, God is really in control of all these things. She's trying to hide from him, right? She's trying to hide herself and get away from the fact that she knows what's about to happen to her. She's trying to she's trying to hide herself in any way. Verse 31. And as Jehu entered in at the gate, he said, had Zimri peace, who slew his master? And he lifted up his face to the window, and he said, who is on my side? Who? And there looked out at him 2 or 3 eunuchs. And he said, throw her down. So they threw her down, and some of her blood was sprinkled on the wall and on the horses, and he trod her underfoot. So he sees Jezebel up in the window, right, or up wherever she's at. He comes into the city. And he says to people that and he says, are any of you all with me? Shove her on down. 30. So they blood was sprinkled on the wall, and when she hits, a little graphic, but she splatters. Okay, and Jehu then takes the horses that he's on, and they trample her to make sure. Get to verse 34. And when he was come in, so Jehu now, Jezebel's there, dead, trampled on the ground. He goes in, verse 34, and he's come in, he did eat and drink and said, go see now this cursed woman and bury her, for she is a in the feet and the palms of her hands. So they go out, and all that's left is her feet, not the back of her hands, just the palms. And wherefore they came in again, so they run back to Jehu, verse 36, and tell him, and he said, this is the word of the Lord which he spake by his servant Elijah the Tishbite, saying, in the portion of Jezreel shall dogs eat in the portion of Jezreel, so they shall not say, this is Jezebel. Point that we're not going to be able to bury you, and the rest of your what is left of you, the few bones that are left, is going to be nothing but dung and nothing but just manure, and nobody's ever really going to have anything to do with your name ever again. And just as Elijah had predicted, of course, we see it now. And as is and history or have heard of anything within. No, right? No. The name is and just was going to happen that she did. Here's the other map. As we see Jacob being appointed to one more thing that should pop. Yeah. And then next week, and I've got chapter 10 in 2 Chronicles chapter 24 to get through before this lesson is over. Just that had been full as we with salvation, we can count on the salvation and the eternal life. God promises blessings for a life lived obedient. We can count on those blessings for a life lived obedient. But as we see today, God also has promised what? Chastisement for sin. He's not going to allow sin to continue to stay in the lives of Christians. He's not going. He has to judge it. That's what God is. He wouldn't be God if he didn't have to do that. So just like we can count on the blessings for obedient lives, we can count on the butt whoopings for a disobedient life as well, because God's promised that that's going to happen. And that's the and continue you again for the lesson that we have here. We see people being obedient to your word. Something is even as simple as the young prophet the young man that went running in there and did exactly as Elisha said, to Jehu carrying out just as you had commanded him to Elisha being obedient to the word that you gave him as well, and we also see disobedience as well, Lord, as we looked at today. So we pray, Lord, as we see this and as we're reminded of these things, we are such a sovereign and the blessings give us and take care of the burden